Hey everybody, it is Friday, January 6th, 2023, and I am very quickly realizing why my previous commitment to the 30 and 30 faded away. These are not challenging to find inspiration from, but the process of resonating with the inspiration for the day and then writing the notes out that I want to deliver to you and then recording the video. I'm not editing any of them and the upload process and all that. It's a process. So I hope that you are able to resonate with some of these experiences that I'm delivering to you. I just finished watching a documentary. I'm on documentaries right now. Don't ask me why. Probably because I'm curious about how other people move through this lifetime. And so the documentary was called Arctic Daughter, A Lifetime of Wilderness. And it was based and narrated by this woman, Jean Aspen. And she grew up with parents that were adventurous. They had spent 12 years exploring Alaska via canoes, dog sledding, hiking, all of those elements. And so she was born into this family that had the sense of what the connection of nature and spirit meant to them. When she was 3 years old, her parents divorced, and she and her younger sister, who was 18 months old, went to live with her mom. Um, and then when she was 14, her mom set out on her own adventure and took the daughters with her. She got funding somehow for enough money to have this canoe built, and they set afloat into the Peace River, and that was her first real, you can hear my dog, he's very excited about this. That was her first real introduction to the physical work that it took to actually be on your own in the wilderness and explore and rely on the land to provide for you. When she was 22, she set on her own adventure with her fiance at the time. They got their canoe, they loaded everything up. They had not much room in their canoe, and they realized by the time they actually got to the river that they had forgotten a map. And they were exploring this part of the world that had all these canals and offshoots that if you didn't know where you were going, you could retrace your pathway. And, canoeing is not easy on the body. And so it was important for them to know the pathway. But they also decided that, she said, it gave them an opportunity to try out themselves against the world and to follow their own destiny. So they followed the rhythm of the water. They followed the pathway of the flying geese. They followed, the way the sun rose and set. And that's a very trusting process to allow to guide you, right? Mother Nature is guiding your pathway and you're having to trust it. You have to have faith. In their process of canoeing and trying to find the perfect space to camp and then at some point build a cabin, they understood that whatever they took from nature, they needed to give back in some way. She said, if we don't bring something back to the table will be empty. And so it's this idea that we still carry forth with us now, right? Leave no trace. When you go out into nature, it's respectful to not take anything. I've been guilty of, bringing home shells from the beach. But if I do that and you do that and all the other millions of people do that, and we're not giving back to Mother Nature in some way, it's going to be left without for generations to come. And so she talks about, She says, poverty of spirit if you have too much. So it taught them to live very simply. And she felt that as she was growing older, that the more she had materialistic in her life, the less she was connected to spirit. And so I can see that for sure in my connection when I am out on a hike, that is where I am connected to my higher power the most. And the only thing I normally have with me is a backpack, snacks, and, journal. So I don't need all the other elements that I have in my home. It's not as easy for me to connect with spirit when I'm in my home and I can step out on a hike and boom, instantly be connected. She talks about the way living on the land taught them to not not to focus on living forever or securely, but how to live joyfully. And that it's really about being in the moment, right? I talked in the video yesterday about Santosha, being content with what we have that's right in front of us, not grasping on the idea that when our dreams come true, then we'll be fully content or fulfilled. Let's see, what other notes did I have? She said there are no agreements or resources in what you're called to do. If you pursue with an open heart, avenues open up for you serendipitously. And so again, it's trusting that we don't have to know the pathway. We just have to follow it with an open heart and have faith that our higher power is going to open the right doors for us at the right time. But what ends up happening is that we lose faith and we lose hope, and I am totally guilty of that, 100%. When I'm in those moments of not trusting my higher power, I feel powerless. I feel helpless, and I feel like the things that I want to have come into my life are just never going to be laid before me. And so she's saying that it's so important to just pause and let the heart breathe and pray and remind your higher power of the things that you want to have presented to you. She says hardship is our greatest teacher, essential to establish any unity and courage within us, that we are a guest of this land and that the nature of life is change. And she was shown that by the way the seasons would change and how even though we know we have summer, fall, winter, and spring, all of those seasons change, but every year they're changing differently. Look at the storm that we just had. We haven't had anything like that in years. And so it's never a guarantee that change is always going to be the same, but it's inevitable that change is always going to happen. She ends up building this cabin with her fiance at the time, and they live there, and they decide at some point that they've had a realization that it's time to go back to civilization. And so they leave and they go back to Phoenix, and she enrolls in school, and her husband gets a job being, I think, an airline mechanic. And he ends up falling in love with somebody that he worked with, and they get divorced. And it was at that time that she says that she felt foggy and that she felt like this pathway that she had been planning on walking down, which was going to medical school, was all of a sudden roadblocked. The reality is that she ended up not getting into medical school. It ended up not being the pathway for her. Neither was that particular marriage continuing on. So she talks about life as a creation, not a discovery. That creation comes about by the manifestation that we put together, the things that we dream about, the things that we ask our higher power for. And that's not to say that all of those things are really meant to be in our life, right? Medical school wasn't for her. She thought it was, but her higher power said, no, there's a bigger plan for you. So she says you have to choose your direction and you have to create the pathway. So you have to take the steps. She had to apply to medical school only to find out that it wasn't the pathway for her. And she said each moment of life is an irreplaceable jewel. She talks about how even the disappointments that we go through, like for her not getting into medical school, getting divorced, taught her so much about this pathway that shifted for her in her life. And she says we evolve every time there is change. Evolving is painful at times, right? We want it to be pain-free, but most of the time, the biggest growth comes from the hardest times. And she says life is just not about growth and expansion. It's about pruning and returning to the land. So she ends up meeting a new gentleman, and they get married and they have a son. And they end up at some point taking the son to live in a cabin that she and her new husband had built together along the land. And he grows into this very spiritually connected young man. He becomes a nurse, and he moves, right? He goes back to the States, and I think lived in Phoenix, which is primarily the area that they were concentrated in when they were not living off the land otherwise. He ends up passing away at the age of 26. And she says society doesn't give us the tools to deal with devastating experiences. We aren't taught in school how to move through grief. We aren't taught in school how to move through divorce. We aren't taught in school how to deal with when somebody we love gets cancer. Yet we are expected to know and to make it through without any mistakes. So if you're somebody that's going through anything that feels devastating to you, give yourself some grace and time to heal. She says each of us has the ability to let go of what we think we need in our life, and we will be rich by it, not impoverished. That was a big statement for her to make. Through rituals and prayer and being back on the land after their son had passed, they were able to let go and move through the grief of losing him so early. At the end of the documentary, she says, live consciously, pay attention to the small things, the sound of the river flowing, the chuckle of your children laughing, the smell of the pine trees, the warmth of the sun on your cheeks. She says we are gifted every day. And she says gifts of every day, recognizing unity and wholeness to all living beings, allow us to step out of the insanity that society is trying to hold us within. And what that basically means is that we forget that we are connected to the land. We are connected to God through that interaction, right? God created the land, And when we step out in it, that's why so many of us feel such a higher connection spiritually than any other place that we're in. She and her husband decided to reflect on that idea that if we do not give back to the land what we take from it, the table will always be empty. And so she and her husband go back to the land and they disassemble the cabins that they had built. They removed all the nails. They floated the logs back into the river to disintegrate. And um, every inch of building components was completely dismantled in a loving and productive way so that it would go back to Mother Nature to give her the fuel and the energy that she needed to rebirth something new. That in itself was impactful for me because I do believe in energy. We are energy. And so if we are taking energy from Mother Nature and we are not giving it back in any way, we're going to feel that karmic residue at some point, either in this lifetime or the next. So think about it the next time you're out visiting the beach or a walk in your neighborhood or playing with your kids at the park. Can you stop and pause and give something back energetically uh, to the nature and to God that you're standing within? I recommend reflecting on how you connect spiritually. Maybe it's you go to church, and that's beautiful. Maybe it's when you're in seated meditation. Maybe you don't have a connection. Maybe you are seeking that for this year. If you are, step out in nature and look up, look around you, close your eyes and tune into the five senses. What do you see? What do you smell? What do you feel? All of those elements are part of the energetic body that we tune out and disengage from in these worlds, societies, rooms, wherever we're at, that we are overstimulated by social media, TVs, radios, all of those things. So that's the message for today. Reconnect with your higher power through nature. Don't take it for granted and give back when you can. Enjoy the small moments. Be okay with not knowing how to move through grief or heartbreak or a loved one being sick. Just be with an open heart as often as you can. Have a beautiful rest of your night. Thanks for watching.